The Interstate Highway System didn't exist until 1956, but America needed to be built before that. Somebody had to move the steel, the grain, the timber, the concrete. Somebody had to drive. Before the on-ramps, before the mile markers, before the rest stops and the way stations, there were men behind the wheel of machines hauling loads across roads that weren't much more than dirt, mud, and gravel. No guardrails, no shoulders, no GPS, just the rig, the road, and whatever was waiting on the other end. These are the 9 big rigs that hauled America before the interstate was even paved. Before there was a trucking industry, there was the Mack AC. It showed up first in World War I, hauling artillery, supplies, and men across the bombed-out roads of France. When the soldiers came home, the truck came with them, and it went to work. Coal mines in Pennsylvania, lumber operations in the Pacific Northwest, steel mills in Pittsburgh. Wherever the load was heavy and the road was bad, the Mack AC was already there. Hood up, chain drive turning, doing what no other machine on 4 wheels could do. The British soldiers who saw it on the Western Front called it the Bulldog. The name stuck, so did the truck. Chicago built some of the finest things in American industry. The DiamondT was one of them. Built by the DiamondT Motor Car Company out of Chicago, Illinois, the Model 921 became the rig of choice for oil field operators in Texas, steel haulers in Pennsylvania, and freight companies running the long corridors between the Midwest and the coasts. What set DiamondT apart was the build. These were trucks designed to be respected, not just used. Cab quality, frame strength, and reliability on roads that hadn't seen pavement in years. Some freight companies ran DiamondT rigs exclusively, not because they had to, because they'd learned what happened when they didn't. By the time the war came, DiamondT was hauling for the Army. By the time the war ended, it was hauling for everyone else. The Pacific Northwest was not an easy place to run a truck. Mountain passes, logging roads cut into hillsides, rivers with no bridges, winter that came early and stayed late. If your rig couldn't handle that, you didn't last a season. Kenworth, out of Seattle, Washington, understood this. Their Model 346 cabover design, cabover engine, COE, put the driver directly above the front axle, shortened the overall length of the rig, and gave operators more trailer space on roads with strict length limits. On the mountain routes connecting Seattle to the interior, that wasn't a luxury. It was survival. The Kenworth 346 COE became the backbone of Pacific Northwest freight. It connected the timber country, the fishing ports, and the farms of the Columbia River Valley to the rest of America, long before any interstate came near. Peterbilt didn't start as a truck company. It started as a problem. Theo Peterman owned a lumber operation in the Pacific Northwest and couldn't find a truck that survived his roads long enough to pay for itself. So in 1939, he bought a failing truck manufacturer in Oakland, California, and built his own. The first Peterbilts were designed from the ground up for punishment, heavy frames, reliable engines, and the kind of construction that assumed the road was trying to kill you. Because in the Northwest timber country, it was. What Peterman built for his own operation, other operators noticed. The Model 350 became one of the most respected big rigs hauling freight through the West Coast corridors, California, Oregon, Washington, on roads that wouldn't see a federal highway designation for another decade. Peterbilt didn't wait for the interstate. The interstate eventually caught up to them. The White Motor Company had been building trucks since 1900. By the time the WC-22 arrived in the mid-1940s, they knew exactly what a long-haul operator needed. The WC-22 became one of the most recognizable big rigs on American highways, or what passed for highways before 1956. Freight companies running the routes between Chicago and St. Louis, between Memphis and Atlanta, between Kansas City and Dallas. They knew the white WC-22. Dependable, capable, built to run loaded, day after day, on roads that weren't designed for the weight they were carrying. In a time when operators often had to choose between a truck that looked good and a truck that worked, the WC-22 did both. It showed up on time, and it came back in one piece. That was enough. There are trucks built for good roads. And then there are trucks built for roads that aren't roads at all. Autocar, out of Ardmore, Pennsylvania, built the second kind. The Autocar 8144 became the go-to rig for operators who couldn't afford a truck that broke down, because where they were working, a breakdown meant days, not hours. Appalachian coal country, Rocky Mountain mining operations, logging terrain in the deep south where the ground turned to mud for months at a time. Autocar's build philosophy was simple: over-engineer everything. The frame, the axles, the cab. If a part could fail, Autocar made it stronger before it left the factory. Operators who ran Autocars developed a particular loyalty to them. Not sentimental, practical. When a truck keeps you in business year after year on roads that destroy everything else, you don't switch brands. Freightliner didn't start because someone wanted to build trucks. It started because Consolidated Freightways, one of the largest trucking operations in the West, couldn't find a truck that held up on their routes. The rigs available in the early 1940s were too heavy, too unreliable, or too expensive to keep running. So in 1942, they built their own. The original Freightliner WF 864 COE was designed by operators, for operators. Lighter than competing rigs. Aluminum cab, and that cabover layout, driver sitting above the front axle, gave maximum trailer length on routes where state law capped overall rig length. On the western routes Consolidated ran, that extra trailer space paid for itself on every load. What began as a fleet solution became a company. By the early 1950s, other carriers were buying Freightliners because Consolidated's trucks kept outperforming everything else on the road. The truck built to fix a problem became the template for the American big rig. That's a very American story. If you were running freight in America between 1940 and 1956, chances are you knew the L series. Mack's LTL, powered by the Thermodyne engine, was the big rig of the war years and the years after. It hauled war materials to the ports. It hauled building supplies to the suburbs being carved out of farmland. It hauled steel and rubber and food and everything a growing nation needed to keep moving. What made the LTL different was reliability at scale. Mack had spent decades refining their trucks for punishment. The aluminum engine components kept weight down without sacrificing durability. Operators who needed a rig that would run the country month after month, year after year, in rain, in heat, in the kind of road conditions that had no name because nobody had bothered to pave them yet, chose the Mack LTL. By 1956, when the Federal Highway Act passed and America started building the road system it had always needed, the Mack LTL Thermodyne had already carried the country on its back for 16 years. It never got enough credit for that. There are trucks that move freight, and then there are trucks that define an era. The Mack B61 is the second kind. Introduced in 1953, the B61 arrived at the exact moment America was deciding what its roads were going to look like. The Federal Highway Act was 3 years away. The interstate didn't exist yet. But the B61 was already built for what was coming, and for everything that still wasn't paved. That long hood, that chrome grille, the bulldog on the cap. If you grew up in America in the 1950s or 1960s, and you stood on the side of a road and watched traffic go by, you saw this truck. You heard it. You felt it in your chest when it passed. But the B61 wasn't just an icon. It was a workhorse. It hauled steel out of Pittsburgh when the mills were running 3 shifts. It carried produce from the San Joaquin Valley to the warehouses of Chicago. It moved lumber from the forests of the Pacific Northwest to the construction sites of a nation building itself from the ground up. It ran the southern freight corridors before the interstates stitched the region together. It was on the road before the road was ready for it. When the Interstate Highway System finally opened, mile by mile, state by state through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, the Mack B61 was the first big rig that looked like it belonged there, because it had already earned it. Every driver who came after it, every rig that rolled down an American highway in the decades that followed, owes something to this truck. The Mack B61 didn't just haul freight. It hauled America into the modern era, and it looked exactly like what a big rig was supposed to look like while it did it. 9 rigs, 9 stories, all of them running on roads that the country hadn't gotten around to paving yet. The Interstate Highway System gets the credit. It gets the history books and the documentaries and the before and after maps. But the men who drove these trucks and the machines they drove were already out there, already hauling, already keeping the country moving before the concrete was ever poured. They didn't get a dedication ceremony. They didn't get a ribbon cutting. They got mud roads and mountain passes and loads too heavy for the bridges they had to cross. And they showed up anyway. That's the story of the American big rig, and it started long before 1956. Which one did we miss? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. If this is the kind of American history you want more of, subscribe and hit the bell. We've got more rigs, more roads, and more of the vehicles that built this nation, state by state, era by era.